and welcome to the Nerds for Earth Exploration interview. We are a volunteer network of self-identified nerds who use our technical skills to help people who help the planet. I'm your hostess, Kelly Rose, also known as the Coyote, and in this interview, we're going to hear from two social and environmental entrepreneurs, community builders, and trendsetters who support the Mycelium Network to build good, rich soil and feed their communities emotionally and physically. I hope you enjoy this interview with Pashon, the founder of Detroit Dirt, and Michael Martinez, the founder of LA Compost. They're going to get into all those tips and tricks as well as their personal experiences creating compost in their communities. Hi, Pashon and Michael. Welcome to the inaugural Nerds for Earth fireside chat, or Earthside chat as we're calling them. I'm so stoked to have both of you here today. All of the people that I love in the world, you are two of the most that I really love and respect professionally. And I'm just so excited that we're going to get to talk about you and your stories today. I'm wondering if we could just kind of start off just so people can get to know you, although I think a lot of our audience will know you. If we could start off by talking a little bit about how you came to this work, like what's your origin story? And if you wouldn't just mind sharing that with everyone, that'll help us get oriented and get started. So Pashon, I'm wondering if you can start us off.
Sure. Thank you, for this opportunity to, be interviewed. I totally respect both of you as well. And of course, Calla, we have a little bit of a history, but I'm grateful for these type of opportunities are definitely needed. But how Detroit Dirt came about is one thing, but how I got into the actual composting space goes back probably to my childhood, because my dad was involved with waste management. He had contracts with the city and the county for snow plowing, waste removal, construction. And so I've always been out in the elements, and traveling to the landfills is what sticks out in my mind the most, and really what impacted my work today, as well as the trips to my family farm in Mississippi. But, I'm going to skip through and just go right into how Detroit Dirt came about. And basically, I was in the automotive community. They were talking about landfill free. The urban farming community was or had some type of resurgence really in this community. And I saw that there was a lack of resources. There were three key areas that really weren't being addressed, and one was food waste. The other was the urban farming community didn't really have a lot of resources. And then the other thing that stuck out to me when I left Grand Rapids and moved to Detroit in 2005, I felt like the whole sustainability movement at home in Grand Rapids had a lot of momentum and acceleration, and Detroit didn't really have that same momentum. So I began to take a lot of things that happened in my background and experiences, and I wanted to create this model that was socially, economically, and environmentally impactful. And I felt like composting, food waste, and really materials management, it was really where my heart truly was, because I felt like the landfills for the last 20, 30 years, at least of my life, didn't really, to me, have a purpose. I felt like we could replace landfills. And so recycling, materials management, and composting became the key factors in my life that were the drivers. And so Detroit Dirt basically was created out of for me, it was more spiritual and it was community, but also economically getting people to understand the importance of waste diversion and creating compost, which was a byproduct of, waste diversion. And so that is really what gave me my inspiration, was my background, my experiences, my life, and just wanting to create an opportunity for urban farmers. We were an engine for urban farming in the beginning, but along the way, became a bigger scope for me, like I said, of materials and managing those materials properly. And that's how it all began for me.
That's wonderful. And how many years have you been on operation, and how much compost do you make these days?
So, Detroit Dirt, we ran our first pilot in 2008. We established a company in 2010. I would say on average, in the beginning, when we were looking at wholesale, because now we sell retail compost and worm castings. In the beginning, in the first 5 or 6 years, I would say probably 4 or 5 tons a month was, kind of that the crossroad between um, the decomposition of actually the materials. But I would say now we're averaging about maybe 15 tons, 15 to 20 tons, because we were getting material from spent grain from breweries, distillers, and the Detroit Zoological Society was probably every 2 weeks delivering anywhere from 2 to 3 tons of herbivore manure. So I would say on average that's where we are with composting.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And Michael, you also have a history of a landfill in your childhood. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be where you are today.
Yeah, thank you. It really didn't hit me in regards to like my social location and upbringing until like I was at an adult age and realized like, oh wow, like I grew up next to the Puente Hills landfill and always wondered what it was and what it meant. And it wasn't until the past 10 years that I realized the impact that landfills have within an environmental justice lens and communities that live in close proximity to them. So I grew up, born and raised in Los Angeles. I think for me, similar to Pashon, is very much family oriented. My father was and is an upholsterer for the past 40 plus years. He was also a seasonal farm laborer when he immigrated to this country. But food was a foundational topic of our family. But the reason why I bring up the upholsterer situation is because my father, similar to what we do with compost, is he could take what people considered waste, such as trash furniture on the side of the road, and transform it into something beautiful, something of value. And I think that's very much what we do with composting and seeing things different. And similar with my grandfather, who was a carpenter, again, could take broken pieces of wood and take what was once a beautiful mess and turn it into something that was whole and rich and somewhat coveted. And I think for me, my story was very much rooted in my time as a teacher. I had an opportunity to teach fifth grade reading and writing. And it was there where I would often use gardening and farming analogies in my classroom. And there was really one question that kind of struck me. And one of my students asked, "How does a Cheeto grow?" And it was a question that kind of like stopped me in my tracks and really showed me that there was a disconnect from just like where food came from, where it went, and so on. And a small little school garden that was not profound or life-changing really started and planted the seeds of Valley Compost, really allowing people to be a part of the conversation, to construct their own knowledge, and for me to be a facilitator of the work rather than saying how to think and how to do. So that's kind of where the seeds of Valley Compost started. We started as a bike pedal power collection kind of service here and throughout Los Angeles, where any of my friends and family members who had bikes, I bought them trailers, and we just started picking up from taco shops, juice bars, anywhere that produced organic material. We just said, hey, we want it, and we want to show you that there's no such thing as waste, that these are resources that can be reinvested in our neighborhoods. The compost bins that I built in my friends and family's backyards, the compost we created, we gave away for free at farmers markets. Those donations we received, we were able to build school gardens and really create this closed loop system. That was almost 8 years ago, and we very much evolved and have transformed the way we think and do. And we're very much a decentralized network throughout Los Angeles County of creating different scales of infrastructure, from the individual home to the community garden, school, church, housing project, to the regional farms, urban farms, and parks throughout the city, and really showcasing that life is everywhere, infrastructure can be reimagined everywhere, and that people and communities throughout Los Angeles are the heart and root of this work as well. So yeah, similar to Pashon, we've been doing this work for a while, but we didn't incorporate till about 2013. And yeah, I'm just excited to be a small piece of this larger puzzle that is LA Compost.
It's so awesome, and both of your stories really show entrepreneurship, and from this place of community and wanting to do well for the world and taking something that maybe is perceived as not having value and returning value to that thing, but also to the areas around you. It's awesome to see that so strongly in both of your stories. You know, when we asked the public what were some questions for you, we got a lot of questions about how you started engaging your community. And I think folks are kind of interested in, like, how do you start that conversation with your neighbors or your government or the folks out in a community space? And so I was curious from you all, like from your early days, or maybe now when you go into a new community, how do you broach those conversations with your communities? Pashon, we'll turn it back to you.
Community engagement, it's kind of, there's like 3 or 4 prongs, if you will. Like I mentioned before, I was looking at networks in the city that were committed to environmental justice. And so I wanted to start there because I felt like that would be the easiest path moving forward. And so my goal was to try to get engaged with the urban farming community. I really didn't know a lot of people involved in that movement, but I started with the urban farming community, and then I was looking to see who within the automotive community, because this is just an area focused on, you know, the car. This is one of the car capitals. And so I really wanted to see who was in the network of the automotive community. And I really began to network with those who had focus of sustainability within various departments. And so I would encourage others in their communities, if whether they have composters or not, is to seek out those individuals or corporations that are committed to sustainable practices or the UN Sustainability Development Goals. I just think that there's just some key factors that when you're building a network or creating something, you have to look for the people who are aligned with your mission and your vision. And for me, it was the urban farming. The city of Detroit has a green task force, and there were community nonprofits that were so committed and you know, just dedicating their lives to various aspects of sustainability. So for me, it was engaging with those who were like minds and that were committed to the overall goal. And, you know, climate change was such a huge movement globally. The more that the momentum and acceleration of climate change and climate resiliency began to reveal itself. And for me, the blessing or the reason why I was so grateful to align with so many others in Detroit is people wanted to see change, and that's what we went out and searched for, those who were committed to the change. Now, we did have to create a movement around composting, but the climate change movement was already present, and there was a lot of landfill free. Our incinerators there were tons of people who are working on shutting down incinerators and landfills and creating ordinances. And so over a 10-year time frame, it really was about trying to pioneer and help push and create, you know, guidelines around this work because the city of Detroit really didn't have any focus areas of compost, but the Department of Environmental Quality and the EPA, they did have standards and guidelines. So it was kind of, for me, it was an arduous process in the beginning to get people to focus in on food waste, which was not a topic. But overall, I think we have to engage with others who are willing to fight and to help the movement. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's like helping to build the path as you're walking the path, right? I see that so much in community composters are really, and just what you said of finding the right people, the right allies, and then building it so that you're creating the space that you're occupying as you go, because that space didn't exist before, but you're in that active creation and that capacity of bringing about that space. So, you know, that's a really both an entrepreneurial and an incredible social justice action in and of itself. Michael, I'll just turn the same question back to you, which is when you started going out in your communities and then also when you started to approach the government, tell us a little bit about how that looked for you. I know folks are really curious about how they can get started in their own communities or galvanize their own communities to get started on composting?
Yeah, early on, I guess I had the kind of home field advantage of being from the city and the area in which I wanted to start off. So there was a level of trust and transparency in key stakeholders, whether it was like small business owners, principals of schools, individuals, and families who ran community gardens that I was able to connect with right off the bat. That allowed me to fail and mess up and learn from my mistakes early on. But growing and evolving from just a certain sector of LA to looking at LA County, very much approach this from this understanding that it's all about partnerships. Nothing about compost works in isolation and is in a cubicle. The more you get acquainted and understand like the soil food web and mycorrhizal fungi and the way that things just connect and communicate and share resources, you realize that compost does not operate on its own. And when it is done or is cured and matured, it doesn't want to be celebrated. It wants to add life and add structure and add value to things that are already growing. So what we did was we recognize that our work is very much part of a larger network, from policy and local and municipal governments to green spaces that exist, to immigrant farmers and people who've been growing for a lot longer than I ever have. So the way we approached this was, who's doing this work already? From the community gardens to the urban farms to the front yard gardeners to the master gardener courses, and we just started to engage and talk to them and not try to create anything new, but add life and value to the goodness that they were already doing. And little by little, these relationships turned into stronger partnerships that eventually became hub locations, which eventually became an opportunity for us to replicate this model across the city. But early on, we weren't really involved in many of the conversations with local government. Now we're involved in pretty much all of them at the different levels, from whether it's sanitation, rec and park, even some city council, and even at the state level. But I'm very much a believer that the learning is in the doing. There's one thing about planning and doing the research. There's another thing about piloting it with people who are doing this work as well. And then when it comes to community engagement at the individual level, we've really reimagined how we do that, because often, like not oftentimes, the people who know what they need most are the communities who you're trying to create something for. And the approach we've taken is kind of like under this 3Cs model in Spanish. It's called conocer, compartir, y co-crear, which means to get to know, to participate, and to co-create. In order to create community, in order to establish community engagement, you need to get to know the community. You need to participate in dialogue, conversation, and you need to co-create. If I'm just going to deliver a compost infrastructure that they've never seen, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, is that for pigeons? Is that for my chickens? Is that for, like, no, it's like you have to create a dialogue and allow them to be a part of the process. And we've just definitely seen a huge increase in an overall appreciation, investment, and ownership when the community is a key stakeholder and part of the conversation from start to finish. And now, because we've taken on this approach and we are representing several communities and partners, we are in the conversations for larger change to take happen. But I think every city has somewhat of an inventory as far as what's going on. So I would encourage you, no matter where you're watching this from, to look for, here in LA, we have like LA Food Policy Council or Open Silo or urban ag groups that kind of aggregate all that's going on. So if you're looking to start composting either in your backyard or in this community effort, there's a lot of resources from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance to just other groups that really do a good job of mapping this out. So you'll save on your research time and your potential partnership time as well.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up Institute for Local Self-Reliance. They're a great library of information on different folks doing community compost all across the country. They have great examples that you can go and look at. But there's something that you both touched on that I want to come back to here, and that's kind of like all the unseen work, right? Like I think there's a lot of celebration of the work that we see, which is a beautiful garden at the end of the day, or a beautiful soil that comes out of this process. But you both talked about having to like co-create the spaces that then you can occupy and with the community in your city. You know, I want to hear a little bit about maybe a story of this work that isn't seen as much, but that story of getting to know, of doing the inventory, or of finding your partners and co-creating. And just wanted to offer up just maybe tell an anecdote or a story that is often not heard or told, and people might not understand that goes along with the work that you do.
I think a lot of this work is like inoculating goodness, right? We're in a scary time of a pandemic where we're thinking about infection and you know, it's contagious and all this, but like how do we flip that in a positive way where it's like the beautiful acts and efforts of building soil and coexisting well can transform and translate to many repeated acts of that. And for me, it's like the beauty of this work that never gets told are the people in the communities that we work with, right? Like our team gets a lot of face time, like Compost is heard a lot, but it's really the human network that really are the heroes, sheroes of this movement, because our tagline is soil and people. We're obviously going to focus on soil health and compost, but the people that make that happen are phenomenal. We have one individual in Koreatown, which has, from a population density standpoint, is one of the most densely populated areas in the country. Has a ton of lack of green space, but this individual by the name, I won't say his name, but this individual is phenomenal. He works late nights as a prep chef and more like a dishwasher as well. And he takes all the food scraps from his kitchen and all the other neighboring businesses and takes it to his community garden, and has facilitated an incredible compost tub, has started a free nursery for his neighbors, is giving the compost away to the local gardeners. And like, we provided a little bit of technical support, but he was just like, oh, no, I know how to do it. And we're like, yeah, you do, and it's just incredible to be able to witness it and facilitate any support that's needed. But it's very much a mutual learning experience for us. And I think the more people engage in this work, the more beautiful stories they'll get to encounter and experience. Los Angeles is a city of immigrants, a city of people who are coming from countries that are rich in agricultural culture and experience. And for us to just be a small piece of that is beautiful. And I think those stories of individual community members doing this work at an incredible level don't get told enough, but it's encouraging to know that it's happening and that they're spread and scattered all throughout LA County.
It sounds like that person you described really is a goodness, like someone acting out of goodness of their heart for their community, just doing something that's good.
I was like, where'd you get all your mulch and your wood chips and your stable bed? And he's like, oh yeah, I called the guy right here down the street who's cutting these trees. Like, just like a steward of the work and of sharing of resources. But yeah, goodness and inoculating that. So
it's wonderful. Pashon, do you have any stories that you feel like you don't get to talk about a lot, or that aren't what people focus on, but you feel are important, or you might want to share?
Yeah, I, I have similar stories like Michael, where there are individuals in the community who have been working hard, whether it's, to provide food for restaurants from their urban farms, to individuals that have just been boots on the ground fighting for environmental justice in this community, because we're a heavy industrial community. And there are a lot of organizations who have been unified to fight the incinerator or landfills or Marathon Oil that's, down the road from here, that's impacting communities. And so I have good and bad stories. But I think the negative and the positive balance each other out, because the stories that don't really get told, the people who look like me in this country obviously were dealing with racism and division, and those stories we don't really talk about the negative that's behind the scenes, because this has been a very arduous process. Like I for most of my life, especially here in Detroit, we've had to fight a lot of corporations and those who have their own agenda, who care nothing about the environment. But for me, the inspiration comes from the teachers in these communities, the advocates who have dedicated their life to environmental justice. And those stories don't really get told. But I also want to shine a positive light on those who have taken the time to create community gardens. General Motors, myself, and Southwest Detroit Environmental Visions, and a multitude of others in Southwest Detroit, we took these shipping crates or containers, and we created like a 300-bed garden area in a parking lot that was abandoned. And that's just one story, but I think that there are negatives and positives that happen in communities that don't make it to the news or whatever, or on social media. But the reality for me is I've been very transparent, at times pragmatic, and I've been, you know, I think I've been categorized too in the community as being very stern and hard nosed about certain things, because I just know in my mind, you know, that a lot of young kids who look like me, I want them to have an opportunity to understand the reality of what we're dealing with in this movement. But also at the same time, I want them to be inspired and know that there are others out there who have been working, you know, for the last 30, 40 years to create this harmonious community here in Detroit. But I do believe that compost it's, you know, it's a community. We're all connected to the soil. And at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we're inclusive, you know, because like compost is diverse, so is this world that we live in, you know. And so to me, to you know, tell the great stories, I also have to tell the reality of the negative stories. And I faced a lot of obstacles, and so have others in the community. But the goodness of this, and I think what really brings joy to my heart is now and today, we can currently look back 10, 15 years and say that those of us who really were on the front lines fighting for the change in this community, we've seen a lot of progress. And that's the beauty in this. No matter what has happened or occurred up until now, we went from having a few people composting to hundreds of folks composting. You know what I mean? Ordinances are in place. Part 115, we've seen a lot of people take the initiative to not only, you know, talk the talk, you know, but walk it. And that's the beauty, because now I don't need, you know, it used to be I was trying to encourage a lot of others in the community to start composting. Now there are farms that are sustaining on their own. There are people who have their own composting operations, which is a beautiful thing. But at the same time, like I said, it was a tough fight getting to this point.
Just in the time that I've known you, there's been a lot of kind of maybe false offers, challenging situations, you know, roadblocks, and you know, you just pull through them and keep going. I want to, you know, really give you props for continuing to be present and hold that space and take up space when it hasn't been given to you. And I really appreciate you as a justice and advocate for justice within the environmental movement, both racially and environmentally. And I guess I have a question here that came in, and it's pretty specific. So Pashon, I'm going to read it for you. And it kind of has to do with this question of environmental justice and space in Detroit. So the question is, the city of Detroit is still dealing with a lot of vacant properties and abandoned structures. Lack of investment in these communities has led to continued abandonment, and for businesses to continue to move away in many cases. This can often include the businesses people rely on for their food sources, further disconnecting people from the process that nourishes us or feeds us. How have you leveraged or seen people leverage vacant land to empower people to grow food and compost in their communities, and some of the deal with some of these environmental justice issues that many of the communities in Detroit are facing?
Excellent question. And the, you know, 15 years ago, if I would have gave a perspective, it would have been kind of like having this activist and advocacy perspective of trying to rally the community, because there were so many of us who were fragmented, right? We were all working on our own agendas, but because there were certain people who were older and who are committed to environmental justice, they kind of corralled or brought people together. And you know, with the vacant land and properties, I think that Detroit, the story of Detroit, you know, in the media is portrayed with that porn blight, you know what I mean, with that those vacant properties. The positive stories don't really get told about who's been here for the last 40, 50 years, what generational families have, you know, quite frankly, been very successful in impacting globally. But what I will say about the vacant properties is the urban farming community, most of these urban farmers, their agenda was to clearly take these vacant properties and bring people together, but not only bringing the folks together, but also growing things that would help spearhead a local economy. We have one of the largest farmers markets in the country. The Eastern Market has, thousands of people that are there on Saturdays, Tuesdays and Saturdays. And the beauty in that is the farmers who come in from all over Michigan and this region, but also the urban farmers who grow everything from mixed salad to, kale or whatever it is. They're actually all selling together. And I think the beauty in that is, despite the blighted homes that really get shown, not the beautiful old neighborhoods that we have throughout the communities, the vacant properties, I think that there was just an initiative from, infrastructure to really talk about it from a planning perspective, because we knew that the infrastructure here needed tons of investment, but we had a lot of nonprofits and organizations that were focused in on creating these maps, if you will, and creating timeframes and timelines where we could have these benchmarks where different organizations would take the initiative to say, hey, we're going to clean these vacant properties. We want to grow on these vacant properties. We would like to push for legislation or policy around urban farming, gardening, or whatever. So I think collectively, these coalitions and organizations decided to get together from a planning perspective and create goals around, tackling these issues. And it's a safety and health issue as well. When you have young kids walking to school in the dark at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, a lot of crime can occur in communities that have vacant properties and grass that's overgrown. So I do want to give a shout out to those who took the initiative to volunteer and to clean those properties as well. So I think from a planning perspective, clearly planning is about creating plans, but you have to find all the talent and resources and people that can come together to really tackle those issues. And I think that the city of Detroit, they've done an excellent job at recovering and redirecting and getting, talent and recruiting talent from all over the country to help them address these issues. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for telling that side of the story. It's really great to hear about it. And Michael, there was another question for you that's a little bit particular, but so I'm going to read it again here. And it says, we often see public education breeze over essential topics like mental, physical health, financial well-being, and things like growing our food and where food comes from. To your point about Cheetos not growing on trees and you being a teacher, it seems that this individual writes, it seems that summer camps are where inner city kids learn to connect with the natural world, but not every child has a privilege of getting out to camps like these. Do you feel there are opportunities to reshape public schools or other systems to give kids and teenagers the opportunity to be engaged in growing and nurturing fertile soils and green spaces in cities? And have you heard of any approaches like this, or do you work on any yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it starts with like a shift in our understanding of like experiencing nature, and this also happened to me, and it's just like nature is one both all around us, no matter where you are in LA, and you are also a part of nature. So I think for kids and youth, it's important for them to understand that they are nature. They are a walking embodiment of life and nature and the goodness that nature possesses. Granted, we feel more at ease in natural system where there is flowing water, a tree canopy, fresh air, etc., versus like airplanes flying over you, no trees, power lines, etc., in certain areas of the city. There are some incredible organizations that focus on ensuring that there is, they understand that there is a divide in regards to just accessing like spaces such as state and national parks and larger green spaces. And there's an incredible organization such as like Wild and Outward Bound that focus on getting kids outdoors and just experiencing different parts of nature, so to speak. Within schools specifically, I'm personally very much a believer that like education is only as strong as access and opportunity that you allow for someone to put what was learned into practice. So with that being said, I think it's incredibly important to have green spaces, to have food growing spaces, to have soil building spaces across all schools. And that was very much happening pre-COVID with many different organizations throughout the city. Eco Urban Gardens, Garden School Foundation, Enrich LA, Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust. So we were even a part of that, LA Compost. But there's so much overstimulation nowadays that kids, youth, and even us adults are so overstimulated with a screen and swiping and looking and absorbing so much information that being in a garden or having your hands in compost or turning compost or having hundreds of worms in your hands very much allows for a recalibration, realignment of, I very much see it as like a nature's way of chiropractic care for us to see things more clearly and to breathe and to understand that we are contributors to this work. But there is very much a divide. There's very much a gap in regards to which kids have more access to these opportunities. And even the idea of like camps and summer camps, like that's unheard of for a lot of communities of color. But I think this should be the norm. This should not be an exception or a special field trip. This should be happening all over in libraries, in parks, in parkways, in medians, in schools, in churches, so that compost and food growing is not a backyard hidden thing, but very much something that is happening everywhere and is not just normalized, but very much celebrated and treated with a nice level of accepted with a level of reverence and almost viewed as sacred. So we're very much trying to do that. Obviously, we're one of many partners doing this. And yeah, great question. I have 2 little ones, so I'm just trying to create that reality for them and making sure that this is not an exclusive reality for them, but that all youth and even adults have access to these opportunities, experiences.
Reconnecting the life cycle and engaging other living beings in that process is just such an incredible part of community compost. I want to kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty questions we got, because a lot of people are like, how does compost work? How do I get in my backyard? We have some questions like, let's see here. Can I compost commercial flowers that are covered in conventional pesticides? How do I keep my compost from becoming a breeding ground for flies? What's compost tea and how do I make it? So there's a bunch of these questions, but I want to start off by, Michael, I heard you ask a question the other day that was really great, and I want to turn it back to you and Pashon, and that is, what do you do with somebody who thinks compost is gross and like thinks it's icky? Like, how do you walk them through that and get them to like get into the point where their hands are getting in the dirt and they understand that? So Pashon, maybe you can start off with this question. What do you do with somebody who thinks compost is gross and they're like, ooh?
Never really had a lot of people who thought that it was necessarily gross, but I did have a lot of folks who were kind of scared to engage or touch or, and tons of inquiries over the years about rodents, flies, pests, and things of that nature. For the most part, if someone thinks that it's gross, it's just a natural process that happens in the world. You know what I mean? Like, on the floors of the forests or the jungles, these are things that are naturally occurring, globally. I would encourage someone to, get acquainted with that grossness, you know what I mean? Because in order for you to really truly understand compost is understanding that microbial community, understanding that, all the bacteria, everything that comes along with it. It's just an engagement of understanding what the community or what compost truly reflects. But I do think that the more research that I'm doing, that you're doing, that we're all doing, I encourage so many people on a day-to-day when I get inquiries is to research, because it's not just about the Detroit dirt model and how we compost with manure and food waste, if you will, but it's also about the farmers who have been around for 3 or 4 generations that are composting chicken manure and cow manure and horse manure. There's to me, I think compost kind of gets put in this box too at times, where people think that it's just one way of, composting, or they think about it from, one perspective, but it's multidimensional, because some people choose to compost strictly a specific, kind of regimen or agenda that they have to get a certain outcome. I know a lot of vermicomposters, they don't necessarily take the same route that I take. They, focus in on windrows. Some want to focus in on static piles. Some have the technologies that can break the anaerobic digesters, the biodigesters that can break this material down at an accelerated rate. But I think engagement is the key, engagement and research. And I think whether you have a small pile in your backyard or you're containing it, you have to engage and understand and have a relationship with compost and get to know it, understand when you need to add water, understand the temperatures. It's really about having a relationship. And that's what I did from 3 or 4 different perspectives with it. I didn't go into it going, oh, I don't want to get my hands dirty, or, oh, it's gross. You have to engage and become a part of that compost. From a spiritual standpoint, you cannot engage with composting and expect for it to do or create compost on its own without engaging or helping out with the process. That's just what's demanded of composting, is engagement and understanding the process and understanding, that microbial community. And I get people all the time going, well, what should I put and what should I do? And I try, honestly, from a transparent standpoint, whether it's commercial composters or, residents, you have to start somewhere. And I never encourage people to throw any and everything in a pile. I usually encourage them to take their coffee grounds or their eggshells or specific things that they have wasted in the past, and get them to look at what should they do with that organic material, and what does that carbon look like? What are those, the leaves and the cardboard and whatever. I just think that you have to do your own research and get to know composting from your own perspective, because we're all doing it in a different way. We're all in different temperatures, different regions around the world. Composting is not a one size fit for all. Yes, it's organic material that decomposes, and there are processes that you take, but there's not a one size fit for all for composting globally.
Great. It reminds me of this thing that John Wick always used to say, which was, you get natural decomposition all over the planet, but the only places where you get like rapid decomposition and like thermophilic composting are either where humans participate in the process to like bring it together to make it happen. Some of the delta regions in Africa have some like very quick thermophilic composting, and then there's this one wild turkey somewhere that apparently makes its own piles, tends to them, and compost it. But besides that, this cool thing that we do of bringing all these materials together and really supporting that process to happen in this faster, specific way that results in this beautiful product of soil, or in the being of soil, is unique. Humans have this unique capacity to recreate the earth through composting the way that we do it. And it's great to hear you talk about all the different ways, and just to break down those barriers of fear people might have when starting into it, and just like getting into that relationship. Michael, for you, you must have gotten someone that said compost was gross, since I had heard this question from you. What did you do there, and how do you get people into it?
I try not to get like in heated discussion or get offended, but like I also like to like make it a teachable moment and try to unpack and peel back the layers of what does gross mean and what does gross look like, because it's like, oh, it stinks, or it's just different, or it's weird. And sometimes I'm just like, what's gross is like landfills next to communities is gross. What's gross is like all the environmental injustices that are taking place throughout LA. And rather than like it being a guilt and shame, I try to make it into a moment where we talk about something that they are familiar with, such as perhaps cooking or baking or something like that. And perhaps when you cook a meal that you've never cooked before with ingredients that you've never worked with before, that could be considered gross because it is new, it is something that you are not familiar with. But oftentimes, like, you are always satisfied with the end result often, if you perhaps either followed a recipe or used high quality ingredients. And I think for composting, that's very much similar in the sense that you are creating conditions and you are bringing ingredients together to create something that is processed. And to Pashon's point, it's very much the learning is in the doing, right? You can read a book about it, you can watch a video, you can go to a workshop, but it's like, you gotta do it to really learn about it. And I oftentimes let them see like rotting food scraps straight from like the farmer's market or like from a collection standpoint. And then I just show them like the steamy 140 thermophilic aerobic pile. And then I show them the sifted, cured, mature pile. And I let them know, well, you think this is gross because this is the first part of it. But look what happens when you allow for XYZ to take place. And look what happens when you give it time, love, attention, care. And I bring it back to life. You know, I'm like, we are gross. Like, we as humans are imperfect. We are broken. We are jacked up in many ways. But like, I hope people don't give up on us because of that, because it is a beautiful mess. That it is when people come together. It is when we work through these differences. It's when we go through the fire or in heated conversations or dialogue, do we get to create something new? And I think people always have an aha moment at different stages of these conversations. Most oftentimes it's less of me talking to them and more of them doing it themselves. Thousands of pounds of food scraps, turning this steamy, like, beautiful aerobic compost pile, and then like being 2 inches away from it and it not smelling or anything like that. That's the aha moments that take place for them. And I just want to create that access and opportunity for it to be, for us to shift our thinking about compost in that it is beautiful, it is rich, it is life-giving. And I'll also be real, you know, there's bugs. There could be smells if you do it incorrectly. Like, it can be messy, but like anything that is worth having, like, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort. And just how do we redefine gross? Because I wouldn't equate compost to being gross.
Michael, one of the questions we got was kind of like some of the bins or systems that people might see in community settings. I'm wondering, do you have something that you could show or sort of walk through some of those processes at that scale?
Yeah, of course. There's like no perfect bin. I will say like the perfect bin is like no bin, just like a pile or a windrow. We have like a downloadable guide that we're going to be translating to Spanish that kind of talks about the different bins and composting systems that you can check out on our website. Most community bins, we have like a 3-bin system. And I know we talked about not putting compost into a box, but that's exactly what I'm about to do when we talk about the systems that I use. The 3-bin system's nice, at least for communities, because it allows for a high volume of families to participate collectively in the composting process. I'm going to show you a mini version of one. This is obviously not how big it is at the community, but it's essentially like 3 chambers that allows for a deposit section. So that's like the in bin. So if you're thinking about cooking, this is the KitchenAid or the mixer, or this is your ingredients going in. There is the cooking bin, so no longer fresh ingredients being deposited, but now this is where you are keeping the water, keeping the pile nice and moist and turning it and ensuring that the temperatures are getting to where they need to be. And then you are moving it to a curing or a maturing bin. So you took it out of the oven, you're letting it cool onto the counter, and the process takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months, but there's a variety of systems. There's backyard bins that cities and municipalities give at subsidized rates or free that are more lasagna layered methods and just like a single bin. There's compost tumblers that are nice because it's off the ground and closed, allows for easy to spin. I encourage you to have 2 chambers just so that when one is full, you can start the next. There's easy to build mesh bins that are very inexpensive and just hold the material together, allow for nice airflow and for the material to be easily accessible. There's the worm bins that Pashon was mentioning. There's Bokashi method. There's my favorite is just a pile, a covered pile that allows you to, when you are doing it with the right balance and ingredients, you're not going to have issues of odor or pests. And the beauty of composting is the 4 ingredients that you use to create hot composting are also oftentimes the 4 solutions to any issues you might have. Your pile is smelling, you just perhaps need to aerate it or add some more browns. It's not getting hot enough in the conditions that you want, perhaps more greens and more water. So it's very much learning and doing, and it's like a recipe you perhaps have memorized. You just kind of create the conditions with it. But there's a variety of systems. I would definitely check out to see how much food scraps are you generating to begin with? Do you have access to a carbon source? Because if you don't, maybe worms might be the best way. Do you have a drop-off model? Do you have a pickup service? Like, there's plenty of options out there. And for someone getting started, to Passion's point, maybe be a little bit more picky and strict and say, I'm just going to do mulch and some food scraps and coffee grounds. And then once I get the hang of it, and once my pile gets heated up, once it starts to heat up a lot more, then maybe I'll try some of the things that people are on the fence about, like the meats, the bones, the dairies, the bread. Because I will say that anything that once alive can be composted in the right conditions and environment. So for new backyard composters, I encourage you to start off with something that is perhaps easy to facilitate and manage. But a lot of bins out there. We're happy to support in regards to pointing you in the right direction as far as which bin might work best for you. But you have the space and energy, try it without a bin as well.
And this is a question that I got from a old girlfriend of mine in Los Angeles. She said that her neighbors and her were arguing over if it's better to put their food scraps down the sink and have it go to the digestion facility, or to compost those food scraps either in their backyard or in a compost pile in their city. So I want to open that up to both of you. Digest it down the sink or compost in a commercial or community composter?
It depends on if it's a household. I guess I'm all for composting. You know what I mean? I try to avoid putting anything in the garbage disposal, but that may not be the case for everyone across the board, because there are different policies and different regulations in different cities and counties across the country and the world. But I encourage composting. I just think it's one of the greatest solutions known to man and nature. One could argue that in a small household, that might be the best route to put it down the garbage disposal. But I think when you start looking at larger volumes, I don't think that at the end of the day that's the best process. It would be good to mulch it, or to create a way to help it decompose so it's easier to compost on a larger scale. But I think that argument, it's valid from both perspectives. If it's a small household, sure, they can get away with putting it down the drain and, the garbage disposal. But again, I'm about diversion and making byproducts and encouraging compost. But I think it is up to the individual. But I'm all for composting. And why not help someone out in the community that is actually, composting on their urban farm or in their garden? Why not contribute to that instead of putting it down the drain? You know what I mean? After all, we are trying to push kind of this no waste, because there is no such thing as waste. We're trying to, educate the world on this being resources, because that's what they are. But why put it down the drain when you could possibly take it down the road to an urban farmer or a garden, or compost it on your own? But that's just me. I'm not saying that what people have to do. I'm just encouraging, to compost and participate in the bigger community and the bigger movement of why healthy soils are connected to climate change. So that's just my perspective.
Thank you. That's awesome. Michael, I see you're on the edge of your seat with this one.
No, yeah. We always talk about there's no such thing as a way. And even though you know where it's going, like, to ship something out of your neighborhood when it very well can support the soil and life and resources in your neighborhood is something to think about. And I would always compost it rather than use more water to get it to some place very far away. And granted, yes, the technology for some of these, water treatment centers is pretty impressive, but so is what nature and natural systems have been doing since the beginning of time. And I think that building soil and ensuring that these nutrients are returned to the soil always comes at in my opinion, is always much more prioritized than using perhaps technology or extra add effort or resources needed. But yeah, if I'm always going to vote for building local soil versus using more water to ship it somewhere to be separated and decontaminated and all that. So yeah.
Perspective, you're going to want to compost that. You're going to have a lower greenhouse gas footprint, and you're going to get better soil sequestration of carbon if you compost it instead of putting it down the drain. So that's my weighing in on that one. I guess the last final sort of thoughts here, would ask you to maybe say one philosophical and one practical. And there's this question that comes up a lot. People are worried about composting materials that might have pesticides or chemicals on them. Sort out those materials, and do you take them or not? And then the kind of the philosophical question. I think we've had great philosophical conversation here. But one thing I really want to know from you all is, how do you manage doing the work and telling the stories at the same time? You're both such incredible storytellers, and you also really do the work. And I think a lot of times we see people just telling the story and not really actually doing the work, or folks, like we said, that don't get a story told because they're just busy doing the work. So I want to just hear from you all, like, what your how you do that, how you balance those two things. So, like, being an advocate, being a storyteller, and then really doing, and then how do you compost flowers from a flower shop, or do you? Those are our two questions that we'll close out with.
I'll very much say that composting is a spectrum, right? You have those that perhaps are like purists that will only accept organically grown material and material that they are aware of where that material came from. And there's those that perhaps just want to do all organic material from reaching landfill for the sake of greenhouse gas emissions, etc. If you are aware of something being sprayed with something that is harmful, of course, I would suggest perhaps not adding that to a backyard bin, or a smaller bin that doesn't get to the temperatures or have the diverse volume needed to kind of balance that out. At the same time, for many of our community hubs, we are not able to control what people are putting in the bin at all times. So if you have the option to not put in the bin, okay, from a pure side, I see that. But then I also like ask the question, like, what's the alternative to a lot of these things, right? Soil is incredible in its ability to stabilize a lot of these things, right? And although they might not disappear in the composting process, it's oftentimes not able to be traced back to the next crop or cycle of food when you are composting it. So I don't have a clear-cut answer as far as like yes, no, maybe so. I just want to like kind of paint the picture that, like, okay, if you're on one side of the spectrum that is like pure and whole in regards to like my compost is going to be the best possible, absolutely, don't have to put them in. If you're on the other side, it's like, well, what's the alternative? Where's that's going to go? Maybe you will put it in because you understand that composting is thermophilic. It's hot. It reduces pathogens. It breaks down a lot of inorganic compounds as well to an extent. And by the time it's spread on soil again, it's really difficult for roots to uptake anything like that. But your second question in regards to telling the story and doing the work, it's all about balance and scheduling time and prioritizing the work in the community as well. As someone who helped start the organization and helping lead and facilitate the work, it's easy to just kind of get behind the computer and stick behind the computer and be on the phones. And you need that reminder as to why you do this work. And it's being with community and being with the people and being in around the piles. And the way I do that is just trying to schedule myself to be in the field every single time during the week, and making the time I am with community or teaching a workshop or turning a compost pile as important as a conversation with a municipality or a foundation or a funder, and holding it and viewing it as sacred, because it really is, you know, like I do find myself missing the way I used to be able to work, and that was turning all the time or riding the bike and doing all that. But it's all about balance, and it's all about kind of prioritizing the work in the community as much as the work kind of administrative, essentially. So
I agree with Michael with the spectrum. It depends on what you want your outcomes to be when you're making compost, because there's commercial grade, there's industrial. What you put on the interstate as far as compost that you can use for industrial sites, if you're trying to recover soils on a construction site, would be different than what a 3 or 4 family household would use in their backyard when they're growing spinach or kale. So I think that there are different processes for composting that can address chemically based products that may have had pesticides or things of that nature. But I think food is the same way. When people speak about plants or where materials are coming from. We don't always know where the food is coming from either, or what is it processed food? Is it organic food? And I agree with Michael, there's a spectrum and there's an approach and answer really depending on what you're trying to do with that material, because it can be used for various purposes or reasons. And I also, in our community, we now have, you know, anaerobic digestion and biodigesters. Well, the zoo has one. And so I would basically, certain materials, I would have them, you know, break that down in those chambers. But what I'm doing in a static pile or a windrow or turning and sifting piles might be a little bit different than what they are capable of doing on their site. And then as far as work and you know, telling the story and being an advocate, wearing all these hats. Again, like Michael said, it is about balance, but sometimes balance can be overrated as well, because it's difficult finding that balance. But you know, the stories I think are important when we're focused in on awareness and educating the public and getting them to understand the overall purpose. I'd never have a problem with being a part of the story. But I think as a good example, I can use the Ford ad. When that ad came out in 2014, there was probably 1 million hits within a day or two when that ad went viral. But I never took advantage of the ad going viral because I was too busy jumping in and out of trucks and composting on and still fighting to get the city to support the mission. So I think what we have to do is just prioritize on a day-to-day. It's different, I'm sure, for you and for Michael and myself when we wake up every day, whether it's obligations to help our families, our friends, the composting pile, the advocacy, it all changes from day to day. And I think we just have to find a balance within our lives and just try to keep prioritizing. But I think the stories are as important as the work, as long as you're creating a path for the generations to come, as long as you have a priority to have the best outcomes with whatever it is, whether it's you speaking to a crowd of 500 people about the process and the importance, or whether you're running that day-to-day operation. It's all important, and it's all, to me, the contributions that we can actually make to the planet and to the people. But the philosophical, I think I heard you say 3 things. I don't know, there's 3 or 4 things. The philosophical for me would be, we're all connected to the soil. I mean, and to me, compost is the root of my soul because my purpose came from that. And just like I'm grateful for this opportunity to share this moment with you and Michael, which I have a history with you, Kala, that goes deep with my health and everything else. I think that we as people, we're all connected, and I don't think you can have a resilient movement. I don't think the actual climate change or the movement could be resilient unless we emulate nature, because nature is actually diverse and is made up of a multitude of things that makes that cycle return back to the earth. And so as people, we have to have that same philosophy. I think if we come together and unify to fight in this movement, that's the only way it can become resilient, is if we're coming together and we have to mirror nature, because we are nature and we're one with nature. So I always tell people, compost and soils, healthy soils, we're all connected to the soil.
I use like a cheesy line to like piggyback on like what Pashon says, and I'm like, the only letters that separate soil and soul are you and I, you know, and just like to showcase like it's really just us that can repair any ruptures that exist. But very much echo what you just said, and there's so much parallel and overlaps between human journey in this the human life and soil life, and it's so interconnected. And just excited to be a part of this work with people like you and others across the country, and even in my city and county. So thank you both for your time.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining our Nerds for Earth chat today. And I just want to say thanks for doing the work. Thanks for doing the work of reconnecting. Thanks for doing the work of knowing nature and living in relationship with nature and each other, and really putting that return of what was living back to life front and center. Thanks for being community composters. So appreciate you joining us.